I'm just going to plunge right into what I want to talk about. I'll introduce myself later. I've been watching more on the electric universe material, including a very interesting piece on the Cassini mission and what's now known about the moons and things like the Saturn's electrical fields and the ropes, as they call them, of electrical energy between the sun and the moon. So more and more and more, even though the electrical universe theory sounds like really off the wall and it's not like mainstream at all yet, and still the astronomy, NASA Goddard probably knows about it. They don't talk about, they never talk in these terms. But they keep on mentioning things like the strange field on Io, and the way the craters are, and the predictions made by Will, I'm sorry I forget his last name, the Australian fellow from the Electric Universe movement, I guess is what it is. The generalists who have had a new look at all the extraneous science that didn't fit in, and also now the evidence which scores it all up. So they've referred to Occam's razor in the title because Occam's razor, when Occam's razor is like the Sherlock Holmes thing, when you reduce all the possible options to the simplest one, the simplest one, which is that electricity is the unified field, and it's how stars are made, how planets are made, and all the evidence is there as predicted. Where there's none of the evidence is there predicted as by the gravitational relativistic model of the Newtonian movement of the planets and the creation of magnetic fields from inside the planet. No, the planets, the planets are electrical, and all our weather is electrical. We're electrical. Everything's electrical. So obvious. It's one of those in-your-face kind of realizations. And some of the electric universe stuff on terms of the that I'm seeing more validation of it. So it's meaning that their story about that Saturn had been our star until it was reduced by its contact with the sun, and the sun took over dominance in the system. And also maybe that Jupiter also is a rogue planet that came into an established system, and that's why the inner planets are space as they are. Because there are no other explanations. And there's also this story of, another giant planet was expelled from the system. But in the interpretation of the lore, I will call it, the lore, the ancient mythology of all nations, it's different in each country. And although the Indian and Chinese stories are mentioned, they're rarely gotten into in depth the way that people have gotten into in depth with the Sumerian and an Egyptian story. And I believe the Colburn Bible to be valid in terms of other sources for times and who the Egyptians were and what they knew. And I think now we have proof in the form of the Hiawatha meteorite in Greenland, or the crater, and one of the parts of the meteorite is in Copenhagen at their institute. But there's another bunch of chunks on the crater floor. But also it's commented on in these other things on the craters on the moon, the rills, and that the theories about them being lava tubes and water, lava, anything like that. No, and the same on Io. That the pattern of things that you're seeing obeys the laws of the electrical universe. It doesn't fit with the gravitational universe. And it's been interesting for me because I remember when the first images came in of Saturn's ring from, what was it, Mariner that went by there? The first one. I don't know. I can't remember what's Voyager, was it? Voyager, that went by there, and they had pictures of Saturn's rings. And the braided rings, yeah, okay, twisted pairs, that, okay. They talk about it being shepherding moons, but no. It turns out that Saturn's rings are only tens of thousands of years old, the inner ones, and they're in constant interaction with the planet. This is all scientifically valid. The thing about all these electrical universe material is that all the data is pointing in the direction that it's an entirely valid theory. But if it is, then it says in our archaeological record that, there was this point where Venus did a drive-by after being expelled from Saturn. And Titan is another one. They're all moons, and all of Saturn, all of Jupiter's moons are actually all inside the same magnetic field. And Jupiter is a manifestation of the magnetic field that it's in, as opposed to, as all the planets in it, as opposed to it being the mass of the planet generating. It's a cause-effect issue now. The electricity causes mass is the electrical universe theory. And so all the theories, the cosmology, the Big Bang, and all that, it's out the window. It's a whole other thing, and the Hindu cosmogony now plays into this because I've been watching. I decided to look up the dates on the events of the Mahabharata, and I haven't really got through them yet. And Hinduism, it talks. I want to say Hindus. Yes, Hindus talk in terms of millions of years in the yugas, and how long the yugas are and stuff, right? But yeah, the Kali Yuga only changed in 3000 BC. But they have a firm date. This one guy, through his astronomy, of the skies as we know them to have been since whatever happened with what the electrical universe says, anyway. So, but he has a date of 5408 BC for the date of the great battle between the Pandavas and the Gauravas in the Mahabharata. Mahabharata, it comes out when you say it. I guess I'm going to have to read finally, because it's like the Iliad or the Odyssey and the World War. The private schools all became different. They all became more business schools. Also for the nouveau riche, of the merchant class, and the manufacturing class, and the shipping class, who had the wealth to send their kids to the preppy schools that only the nobility had once gone to, the nobility and the hoity-toities. But there are no more monasteries where gifted souls go to study and scribe, as there were for centuries. There's no more eunuchs, who rose in power in all governments anywhere they were, because they didn't leave heirs, and so they could be appointed to high position without their fears of them provoking a dynastic problem. History is really, really fascinating. I put archaeology in the title because the archaeology of these events is now falling into place. The archaeology of the Occam's razor regarding the electric universe theory of our history and about all our mythologies, as we call them, the iconography of the universe, the cosmogonies, how things came to be, and records of things like comets, which in Hinduism are quite well kept. Abhijit is Vega, and it has to be remembered by all you alternate history people, that you have to be remembered that 11,000 years ago, just after the Hiawatha thing happened, 1,000 years later, Vega was the pole star. So, Hinduism talks in terms of us surviving for millions of years. Well, I don't know, but there has been these very, very long cycles of ice when the non-ice covered areas were much more dry land. And the last one of those was until 20,000 years ago, when the first rising of the seas came, and then another one came at the Hiawatha impact, which melted quite a bit the Arctic, vaporized it first, made this huge albedo, and caused the younger dry ice, which is this 2,000-year reassertion of the ice age, and then sudden melt all of a sudden, and so 11,000 somewhere, so 10,800 somewhere around there, 9,000. It starts by 9,500. The younger dry ice is over, and things are warming up, and you have things by 10,500. You have things like Gobekli Tepe, and I heard new names like Tel Harmoka, Tel Carmel, which are also as old. And I know there's other things right around Gobekli Tepe. I've seen some of the archaeo, and the actual date on the foundation of the Temple of the Seven Planets and the Temple of the Moon Goddess Sin. They're both still there unexcavated, and the Mongols only destroyed them 1,000 years ago or so, something like that. But they had stood all through the other conversions, probably through the iconoclasties within the Byzantine Empire and through the conversion to Islam. They were respected, the knowledge there, the people who knew the songs of the stars and knew the choices of the planet. So this dates back to the Mahabharata date. There's a certain date with the dates described as the position of the stars in the sky, as named in astronomical references, dating the date. And it could not have been later than 4508 BC, the guy says. His name is Srijan. No. Srijan, I think. Yeah, I've got to write him, actually. Because he hasn't incorporated the rest of the electrical universe theory about Saturn having been the original planet. So the astrological dates that he has for before that, where he comes up with 13 million for the Ramayana or something. But he also mentions there's something about the Ramayana 12,000. So there's this cyclic history in Islam, not in Islam, in Hinduism, that I have to look into, and all of us have to look into from the West. We have to start going, okay, we have to start taking, classicists have to start taking East Indian history, the history of India, and those ancient cultures also of what we can find out about what's no longer there, what's underwater in Indonesia, and the great catastrophes that happened in that part of the world. So back to this thing about evidence, right? So 9,000, this Srijan talks in his videos about climate science, saying that was the monsoon now mostly southern India were hitting the Indus-Sarasvati region. Of course, Sarasvati was very alive back then. And the sea, he didn't get into the seas being lower. He does mention 100 meters somewhere, but he misses it 200 meters as far as I know. And but there's also this thing in on the Makran coast of Baluchistan, which is Pakistan got it, but Baluchistan is partitioned between Iran and Pakistan and Afghanistan a bit too, I think, you know. But that coast is where Alexander's army marched through, and there were troglodytes there, pole dwellers, you know. And then beyond that was the Gedrosian Desert, where it's said most of the army died and their camp followers. But to me, it strikes me as natural now that they probably would have returned back to the Makran coast, where those people were eking out a living off seafood and living in the earth. And by the time of Greek Bactria, when a Chinese monk came through there were Buddhist shrines all over there. And the Greeks in Asia converted to Buddhism and advanced Buddhism. People don't understand how much the West was part of the history of Buddhism. You know, and Socrates, pretty much his mind works like a Buddhist, you know. Jesus is said to have been one. But certainly Heraclitus is known to have studied at Upper Chaldea, Haran. I'll keep on referring to that location. But that area, and so did Pythagoras. And the whole thing of the idea of fire is everything. Electrical universe, Zeus is the lightning. And Heidegger has his old on being and time and on time and being are all about this. You know, what about Heraclitus? We only have fragments of Heraclitus. He was one of the pagans who was most assiduously burned by Theodosius II. That's why we have no surviving scraps of him. And sadly, unless a copy turns up in Arabic someday, maybe, you know, some other scroll turns up in the Library of Epicurus once it gets X-rayed, and however many generations it take to translate, you might find it in the dig that came out of Monastiraki in Athens, which is the library of the School of Epicurus. God knows what else is in there, you know. And then you have the issue, you know, like one of their not a Vimana, what do they call them, the shape of a typical shape of a Hindu temple or a Buddhist temple, and other signs that the whole complex along the Makran Coast Highway now is this giant sphinx that's been eroded by some kind of devastation. It would have had to have been devastation, but it's like the one in Egypt that it shows signs of massive water erosion and also the deposit of debris. The thing is, we don't really know the history of the Indian Ocean. Like when the seas rose and drowned the area that they say connected, you know, it would be the Maldives all the way through to Madagascar and Ceylon all the way through to the Andamans, and that part that was all connected, you know. Before which of those raisings of the seas, I don't know, 20,000, 12,000, 6,000, I don't know. But the same with Polynesia and the Caribbean were a continent, you know, and as it says in Plato, where had been mountains became islands. Now he would be referring to the Aegean in his, or also the Egyptians, you know, because they would be knowing about Cyprus even in ancient times. So Cyprus is the home of Venus Aphrodite, the Cyprian, you know, she's called, and some of the most ancient pottery, you know, that there is. But it's also immediately adjacent to Haran and Phoenicia, where the Punic sailors had star knowledge and sailed by the stars, and they had like advanced shipbuilding knowledge. Kind of, you know, how do they know how to take the cedars of Lebanon and do what they did with them? They already had that knowledge when the seas came up, is my view of it, and they started this early. So when the Punic civilization began, I believe, is the formation of the, well, no, when it relocated was in 6000 BC, and then after that, it took a few thousand years, but they established a trade network all around the Mediterranean because they knew it was there. And we're fine for sailing across, you know, open water rather than along the coast because they knew where they were going. They already knew. So what was in the Great Library of Carthage and what was in the knowledge of the Carthaginians is really sad that, you know, Hannibal or his brothers or the other writings by any of them didn't survive the destruction of Carthage, if there were any, you know. But writing your own exploits was not something the Carthaginians did. They just wanted to control the trade. But but their great circular harbor was an echo of Atlantis's. And Atlantis, if you read Plato now and take him as literal fact, then what the Egyptians say about Atlantis has to be taken as literal fact. This is also hard to take for somebody who still wants an academic degree just to put some alphabet soup after his name and teach legitimately, but I'm teaching online because I'm knowing so much that it all needs to be relayed. So, but back to my friend from the Mahabharat. The thing there is he talks about 11,500. There was a certain event he talks about. I haven't pinned down what it was. I'm going to have to listen back and write him and find out what his chronology is. But in his case, when he dates things before that, using the star positions that he's talking about, it's presuming that the precession that we're currently in had to do with our own situation with the sun. And now, our own magnetic connection with the sun is already known now, and Mercury and all of them. We're all electrically connected to the sun. It's not, when those plasma ions come, they're coming across towards our magnetic field, but our magnetic field turns out not to be at all like what was predicted by the former model of science, but fits everything to be said about the electrical model. So Mr. Tesla was right. Mr. Velikovsky was right, although I think he's wrong about attributing Exodus to the comet of 12,800. But no, it's 11,000. He's going on about 1177 BC or something. But as being the date of the Exodus. But there's other evidence I've seen that it's 700, and that's their plagues, the rain flood, all the stuff that went on. So there's other archaeology out there. That's my whole point of putting archaeology in the title. There's archaeology out there that hasn't fitted any known pattern, that they don't understand where things came from. Where did Thracian culture come out of somewhere? Why did Off disappear in 8,500? Well, it turns out there was a cold spell in 8,200 BC. That probably killed it. But in 6,000 BC, the seas came up and would have completely changed the climate of southern Iran and southern Pakistan and India and that area. Would have changed climate in that whole area. But there's certainly volcanoes in the Indian Ocean, and there could be landslides off Réunion in the South Atlantic, South Indian Ocean, and there's other big islands down there. Réunion is pretty big, it is volcanic, and there's others. But if there is this huge subsumance of land, then the wave impact of that is going to have impact back. That when that land floods, the impact of all that tonnage of water flooding over, let's call it, I don't know. They have a name for it in Sanskrit. I don't know what Kanban Kara, but it's not Mu. Mu is like, well, let's just call Mu Polynesia for the hell of it. I hate doing that. But all these were above ground, and this is where most of humanity were. So when we're looking for missing gaps in our history, well, I'll tell you where you got to find it. We got to get more submersibles happening. And we got to take on people like Plato, and like you do with the Mahabharata, the scholarship in India is profound. The details, the stuff this guy gets into, the number of scholars that have analyzed the Mahabharata, trying to pin a date on is really interesting to me. Because Western scholars haven't done that with Troy. They do argue about it idly, but it's sort of like a side issue. But Troy, and the Romanians have to say about Troy gets really interesting in the foundation of Rome, and the war on Carthage, and the lack of knowledge about Thracia, and the way Chaldea, it's really maybe like Athens, a place that we need to go dig. Like it has such an ancient history that the Temple of the Seven Planets and the Temple of the Moon Goddess Sin are just begging to be examined. But there's not money for it, and there's probably politics against it. And also Egypt and the Central Sahara, places you just can't go, either because of Islam or because of war. And Islam doesn't like history older than its own, the same as Rome doesn't. Although there's probably lots of history of pagan Arabia that I have yet to learn, which is I should be looking into. This is the thing about being the kind of scholar I am, is you don't get paid to do my kind of research, because you have to have a focus and a goal in research and fit into enough academic boxes. But you can't learn that way. You can't, because you have to. I'm just always absorbing and digesting information, and now it's gotten to the point I need to relay it, because all this stuff, the mob farther still. He wanted to go to the endless ocean, which meant that he wanted to go to China. But his troops, according to Mary Renault, I would say she's one of the leading scholars on Alexander, although others may disagree with me on that, in her analysis of the sources, it was the troops revolting. They didn't want more endless war, and they'd heard again, they'd heard it from the other troops about, yeah, you got to face more elephants, and you got to face rains, and there's big armies, and we have this history of warfare for thousands of years. And, okay, let's go back to Macedonia. So they rebelled. It was rainy. Alexander had been sick, but yeah. So they says in his Mahabharat video that Alexander saw something that made him turn around and go back. This may be true. That's their version of it. Alexander's return across the Makran is interesting because of the Baluchistan Sphinx, which he wouldn't have noticed, other than it being, wow, look at that thing. Because it is quite striking looking, all these standing pillars of stone and stuff. Right? But the Chinese monk who visited there in whatever century it was said that it was a huge Buddhist temple there and tons of Buddhist shrines. But those would have been put there by, I think, the back end of the army that had followed Alexander from Bactriac, which was all the camp followers. And out into the desert with that crazy man? Are you kidding? No, we're going to stay here, kids. Let's go back to those nice people back with the holes in the ground and with all the fish and the beaches. Let's go back there and live. And they did. And then eventually being from that element, being easily back recruitable into the empire of Bactria, was really a Bactria, was really an empire. Because it spanned more than Afghanistan, a lot more. A Greek-speaking dynasty in Asia with it's all detailed. We always have Western history written as though it's all about Greece and Rome and Western Europe, and even Russia we treat as an outsider in our history until modern times. We treat it, we're not part of it. But even when Putin took Crimea, he's looking at it from the Russian perspective, which you got to get up on the map, turn the map sideways, and look at Europe as at the top of the map, and Crimea is on the left. He moved a chess piece as something that Catherine the Great and Peter the Great or Peter the Great had sought to get, and Catherine did. And from there built the Russian Navy, which caused the Crimean War. Of course, it's important to the Russians. Then it wound up in the hands of Ukraine as a thing that Stalin did, that any government that has some territory is never going to want to give it up. We're back to see a war there soon. But human foibles of war and killing, it's gone on since our most ancient times, or at least since the times before the great floods, when people were more peaceful, the famous golden age when people lived a long time and there were no worries and there was abundant food and happiness, and then sin came and violence. All religions have that story too, which is partly what the Mahabharata is. The Mahabharata, like I said, is the Indian fundamental to their society, the same way the Iliad and the Odyssey were to classical society. Well, we don't have that now. We did have it in upper class Europe and some of North America until the Great War. But since then, the university education has gotten completely specialist, away from generalization. So the specialists have a real difficulty accepting any change in dogma, because you get to be a specialist by embracing dogma and repeating it. That's the plain fact. So to upset the apple cart and propose a radical new theory of science, not a new theory. No. It's been around for a long time. And the evidence has been pointing in that direction for a long time. I'd mentioned Saturn's rings. I remember when that first drive-by camera came in and they had photos of the rings. Remember I said they're only tens of thousands of years old. But really what struck me was, other than the braided rings, there were things there that Newtonian physics could not explain. When I saw it, immediately I went, well, maybe the laws of space are different. The laws of time-space are different there, because what I saw was spiked rings, perpendicular to the planet, straight lines with sharp edges on lines, and like perfectly perpendicular. Only electricity could explain that. That the rings are electric, and that was some kind of interaction with the planet, not the planet, but with the magnetic field that comprises the planet and all its moons. So it's all a completely different universe. And the thing about the electric universe thing, unfortunately, it suggests things about our inner Earth and about the inner sun and the inner moon and our ancient past. So the Mahabharat guy who wants to date using the same astrological positions that he calculated on the known science, he calls it, of the precession of the equinoxes. We're at Polaris. Back then we were at Vega, and at other ones along the way. The East Indians have charted this for years. We don't listen to it. Western classicists, Western historians, and Western media don't really pay attention. But Indian science, it is the oldest civilization. It is basically, India today is the Indus civilization. It survived. It survived intact. It embraced Buddhism, and then it had issues with Islam, but it survived and reasserted itself as the dominant religion in India since then. Partly because of the partition, but the partition has taken a major area heritage of Buddhist tradition, which is both Afghanistan and Pakistan, all of the Indies, and the Makran coast, obviously. What I'm telling you about the Sphinx and the Buddhist shrines there in about the second century before CC or AD, I'm not sure. The Chinese monk who was there. I'm going to have to read more on the Chinese reports from India. You see, this is the thing. Historians out there, you'd stop thinking only in terms of the West if you're doing ancient history, because all the ancient empires were linked in the same way that the planets are linked by electricity. We are more capable than we are given credit for by the anthropological view of slow progress, and that supposedly we didn't have advanced water travel until such a time. No, it's quite clear that people got around a lot by water, and they would have had to once their countries were flooded and the maps became islands, whether it was the South Pacific or the Aegean, and the shipping and the birth of the Punic culture and the foundation of Carthage and what else they knew, but also what else is in Haran. The library of Carthage is one thing, and it wouldn't have all been in one place. It would have been in all the houses of Carthage. Books were a trade commodity, and that's why we have the Cauldron, because books were a trade commodity. Phoenicians had traded it, and it was in Glastonbury Abbey. Glastonbury is not the only place things where it might be. Who knows what else there is? Who knows what the Vatican has, really? And I got thinking about the thing about, I've mentioned the body of Alexander being in the San Marco in Venice. When the conversion happened, it seems that the Serapeum was the central sanctuary where the body of Alexander was kept, was into a sanctuary of the gospel writer St. Mark, which is the body of St. Mark that's now in Venice. But when that Venetian guy stole it, the Serapeum had already been desecrated. But what else would have been in the Serapeum would have been things like Alexander's personal copies of the Iliad and the Odyssey as annotated by Aristotle. What a find that would be if that was ever discovered. So if that library, if that body was taken by this Venetian pirate, he would have known that any books or documents surviving from pagan times were something that were of value to the Vatican, to please the Pope and to please or the Doge or whoever he was taking it back to. And that stuff, if it's not in the Vatican library, might be in a hidden Doge's library in Venice, or within the San Marco itself. They might not know how to handle the scrolls. They might not know, but Great Catafalque is the other place they might be. And where that got hidden, I can't see Ptolemy having had it destroyed. He seized it on its way back to Macedonia and brought it to Egypt along with the body. And the body wound up on display for many, many, many years. It disappeared during the conversion. Well, no, it didn't. It became the body of St. Mark. Now, you're never going to get a DNA test off the Vatican, although it has occurred to me that the Egyptian Antiquities authorities might want to pursue a case for repatriating it to Alexandria. But is the history of Alexandria something that Islamic authorities of the current regime and people you get killed for tourists get killed in Egypt just for being interested in the ancient times. Anyways, it's a huge field, and Occam's razor is telling me that everything about the electric universe theory is true. But it also, if it is, then it really, really upsets the Mahabharat dating, because if Saturn was our sun as a brown dwarf, and we were all on our own until we got into interaction with the current Pellucidar story, I really do, right? But this kind of implication, I've heard of flat earth who try and talk through these terms too, but no, this is, the thing is that the electrical universe posits there is The crust as we know it is only electrical tension shell, and the water, even the waters are all like electrical properties, same as on Io. The rains on Venus and on Io are metallic, and the snows are metallic, electrical, therefore, and the behavior of the comet, this Shoemaker that slammed into Jupiter, there's all this electrical activity they'd never expected to find out. All the data that's coming in, whether it's about the magnetic field or about electrical nature of pulsars, electrical nature of the stars, and the formation of galaxies, and how the Einsteinian Newtonian evolutionary slow theory, gradualism, not gradualism at all, catastrophism. So even though we think of the Rockies as being shifted up slowly, were they really, or were they shifted up like, holy cow, by what? I don't know. I'm just saying, like I said, the weight of that ice cap, where Hudson Bay is now. It's a puddle left over from Lake Agassiz, but Lake Agassiz flooded the world. And that was only 6,000 BC. That's not just inside the Holocene, that's in our historical memory in terms of the records. We didn't date those records before, but we have firm dates on certain things now. Firm dates from 12,800, also firm dates on 20,000, where there was land and ice. But all certain of the tropical areas never had ice on them. Or what was the Amazon when the sea was much lower? I don't know. How was its climate? I don't know. In the Sahara, it looks like the eye of the Sahara thing looks like that lightning bolt shock that's part of this whole process of interplanetary action. So now that they've established that there are these ion bolts between Saturn and the sun, exchanging energy over that distance, I think we need a total reappraisal, not just science and engineering and what's possible, actually. All kinds of technical possibilities. This is just boggling. I mean, I'm not an engineer. I wish I was. But I understand this theory now that the validity is really convincing. I've not seen any. The problem with the relativistic Einsteinian Newtonian mass-based universe is that we're finding lots of stuff that we need to invent more prime forces. Past the strong and weak nuclear forces. There need to be more forces. We have to invent dark matter. We have to invent dark energy. We have to come up with all these theoretical justifications for something that should be so simply understood that you can go build machinery with it like Mr. Tesla did out of the back of his mind. Because he could see how things worked. He understood frequency. Frequency is the nature of the universe. It is music, so I guess that's why I'm a musician. But I'm finding it easy to understand all this electrical universe theory stuff, right? But it just fits so much now. When I started hearing the scientific data this morning, I thought I had to do this. That I'm now convinced of the electric universe theory, but its implications for our own history. The Mahabharat guy, what skies is he using to calculate the positions of the dates of the Ramayana, which maybe were one we were still in orbit when Saturn was the primary planet, because in Greek myth and in other myth, Saturn was displaced as the primary god by Zeus, Jupiter. And supposedly the sun, Apollo, is the son of Jupiter. So something happened. We got drawn into a dual star system, and maybe Jupiter discharged into the help that light the sun off. Jupiter, they also think is a brown dwarf or a post. They keep on talking about it as a star that never lit fire, because of its composition. But it could just be that it's another brown dwarf, like they believe Saturn to be. I haven't looked into much what their interpretation of history is. But it really means that we need to go back and take a very serious, open-minded look at everything of all the apocryphal histories that lie beyond what the church allowed to survive. And the books of the houses of washing and the houses of learning and so other, the mystical houses of the Mideast and India, and the urgency for Western scholars to start really learning Indian history, and especially let's call it archaeoscientists. I said Geo-Archaeology in my title. Archaeoscientists, people who are taking the ancient past and looking for evidence of interpretation of the events and finding the exact dates, because I think we can, of a lot of things. Whether we'll find anything records of such things? I doubt very much. But but we'll know where things were, and we'll understand. Well, Why did the rice cultivation appear in the Mekong in 10,000 BC? Well, because it had probably been on the bottom of the ocean, what's now the ocean, in the Gulf of Thailand and the South China Sea for a lot longer before. So how old are we as an evolved race? I don't know. The Hindu culture says that we are older. They're the oldest civilization, and like the Egyptians were in ours, they're the ones that would know. And that's why Plato trusted them and everything they said, and so did Herodotus. It's why Heraclitus also trusted the scholars of Haran in Upper Chaldea and the astrologers. It's not Sumer that invented all that. No, no. Even cuneiform was invented in Upper Chaldea in Ugarit. So it's that area. This culture of the stars came out of astronomy, astrology, and both Pythagoras and Heraclitus were vegetarian, which is interesting. But people had memory of the most ancient times, and the poets, even in the Renaissance, they had access to materials that are gone now. It's so interesting to see people who gleefully embrace technology without any fear of it. I don't know. Maybe that's just an old way of thinking now. It is. It is. But I see a lot of young people not want to connect. A lot of people who can't. But you can't not have it in the electrical universe. And the reality is, when we have an electrical failure planet-wide, and all the media goes down, oh, geez, it's going to be weird. People have to talk to each other again. Communications could break down overnight. We know this now, but so could our history of the ancient myths tells us. We already know, and we already know from the geo-archaeological record now, the dates of the rising of the sea and what the impact of 12,800 would have caused. There's other questions arising from it. We have all these legends of drowned worlds. There's Avalon, there's Dwarka, there's many of them all around the world. They're all real. Now, as for this phenomena of the skies that was once, augurs were highly paid and they watched the skies, and they did because of the importance of what was going on. You watch the movement of the birds. Of course you did. Big flocks of birds are going to mean something going on, or wind coming or storm. Your weather forecasters are basically auguring, but they don't have their own capacity of commenting on comments, like the blood moon coming up soon. Um, on the weekend, I think it's on the weekend of Act 10 in Paris, so that should be good. A lunar eclipse during a revolution. Oh, I love it. I love it. Speaking again as an augury, I know a little bit about this. Augury is kind of like geomancy. It's the same idea as feng shui, except it involves the skies. What was in the skies, and what was in the skies in ancient times, apparently it was a lot closer up and more in your face and personal. And the rings of Saturn may all be fairly new. At post, losing its other planets, other moons. Titan seems to be, newly born out of the depths of expulsion from Saturn, which is still settling down after all these years. But it seems that Jupiter was involved in the process of kicking it out of the sky and making the sun the primary sun here, and also draining both Jupiter and Saturn of their electrical charges, and they stopped burning. They stopped being on fire. And then also Jupiter's moons would also be ejected from it, stabilizing. And they're also showing all electrical properties and electrical properties on them also. Uranus and Neptune, I don't know how to fit all this in. There's so much more out there beyond that. Where'd they come from? Maybe they're out Saturn spawn too. I don't know. But in myths, although we didn't know about Uranus at the time of myth, we just gave that planet that's name, Uranos in Greek, space. So Saturn's father, Cronus, is space, was Uranos, space. Now, of the ancient gods, it was Kronos and Gaia, Kronos and Rhea. No, it was Kronos, uh, Uranus, and Gaia, I think. So Gaia being the Earth, space, and the Earth alone was the origin of our myths, which suggests that somehow our magnetic field, we must have been drifting in space alone without Saturn in the sky, just space. I'm just taking the myth. How far back, I don't know, but something protected us, that we lived under the starlight, like Tolkien talks about in the first age, before the sun and the moon were born. Maybe Tolkien knows more than, maybe Tolkien had read more into the myth than I understand about the man too. the age of the world when only the elves lived, you know, and the elves and the gods are all the same, of course, but in Tolkien's world. But and then eventually Beleriand rose, the world was changed, and Beleriand sank or was destroyed. So you know he's talking about the proto-ancient history of Earth when he's writing about Middle Earth and its history and its creation, and the creation in the song between the song, the rivals of the heaven and the galactic choir. And it's very much to say it's a very Christian story that he's telling. But in doing so, he's repeating these ancient myths of the flooding of the world uh, that had been ruined by evil and by unwanted power, WONTED power. Uh, Occam basically says now to me that it's all factual. I don't want to go and like somebody saw Oedipus Rex being eaten by the Furies. Was that lightning or was that an earthquake swallowing him? There's two different accounts. Mary Reynolds says an earthquake swallowed him, or implies it in her The Bull from the Sea book. Uh, Not Oedipus, I'm sorry. That was Hippolyte. Same idea as an earthquake or lightning. Well, sometimes it's a difference. The lightning is the earthquake. Zeus is the lightning, and Poseidon, Lord of the Seas, is his brother. And Hades, Lord of the Underworld, is his brother. But the underworld, it sounds like a Velikovskian concept of the universe. The underworld may very well exist. And there's certainly, and again, enough mythological stories, mythological or just oral history knows. And it could be maybe the giants. The giants are the ones who ask the bodies to be returned if we find maybe that's why they disappear. And that's all connected. And maybe that's all about the same way as if there's aliens up there, we already have diplomatic relations with them. We would with any underworld also. But Hades, there's this whole complex in southern Albania and northwestern Epirus, you know, that's a huge cave complex with hot springs and caves. I think they should really start a lot farther back. We haven't really had a real serious look at India, and we haven't had a look at the undersea. The world under the realms undersea worldwide need examination and discovery. But we're spending money on war, you know, and business, and everybody getting rich and worrying about their mortgage payments, and you know, I'm moving out of the world where time will I'll have more time here in the Lower Mainland. Everything takes time, and nobody has any. And money costs time, does it? So I'm moving to a simpler life in the mountains. I hope. I hope it's simple. So I go by Mike Clevin. That's what they gave me when I was born. I've been using the unprofessor because I don't have a degree, but I've decided I need to teach. I will be running a Patreon as the unprofessor, which will mostly be history and archaeology, but also I'm a fervent radical Democrat. I'm totally on the side of the French religion and what they want, which I'll do separate videos on. I have a lot to say about Canadian and BC politics, but also a lot of detailed Canadian BC history I'd like to cover in particular episodes with proper maps and the necessary quotes and images and stuff. All of that takes time to build. I would need not Patreon support, not just financial, but also materials about. Hey, let me get these maps for you. What do you need? What maps do you need? Because for me to look them all, I keep on making this joke. I need 6 of me. No, it's more like 7, more like 17. But Lord only gave me 1 of me. So I'm Mike Clevin. I go by Skookum1 as in blog space. I've used it as a musician now too. Big Skookum also. Big Mike. I hate that. Everybody has it. I have had other names. Michael White, because I have this one bad eye. This one is not looking at you. This one is. The Wanderer, the son of Odin. And I guess I'd have to say, what Hinduism is alive today, surviving of ancient paganism. I guess I'm a pagan revivalist, but not of the trippy kind. This is from the literature and the knowledge of the times, and wanting to know more about what was lost, wanting to know more of Heraclitus, wanting to find Parmenides, wanting to read. I'm going to go read Pythagoras now and philosophy, all that other stuff. There's so much to read yet, and I'm an old man already. I didn't know to read this when I was young. So if young people are watching this, understand that insurance sports and chasing boys and all that stuff's fun, and going shopping and worrying about your future is what they've got you doing instead of learning, okay? Worrying about your future is what they've got you doing instead of learning. And education now is designed to kill your mind and to kill your open thought. So generalism means, reading everything. Even if you're a business student, start reading about ancient Greece or ancient India. If you're Indian, you already know all that stuff. Start reading Western stuff. I have young Chinese friends now. He's 16. He's a good scholar. I'm going to give Plato and stuff like that when I go, and scholarship about the Greeks, that he should know the West like he knows. And I want to know Lao Tzu better. I said this to my grocer. He's Chinese. All of us need to learn more about the world. It applies to us old people that don't have to live to see what's coming. I may. I kind of feel I will. I'll see some nasty things before I'm gone. I know. Have some already. But everybody needs to learn. And you young people are the ones who need to learn most of all. Learn about the ancient past, not just your own nations. Learn your own nations, definitely, but go with a broad brush. Don't listen to any one source. Always listen to 5 or 6 sources, even hostile ones. Make up your own mind. Make up your own mind. This should be dictum for the age. This is kind of what heritage of my 60s heritage, 70s. I'm a 70s kid, graduated 72 high school. But I knew a lot of people from the 60s, and Draft Dodgers and others in Canada, and in my travels, we meet a lot of people. A lot of really educated people out there in the older generation, and the young people don't learn from them enough. They'll deride them and ridicule them and just don't want to hang with them because they're old and boring. But the old people are who the young need to learn from, because we're the ones who have seen what you don't know. And we know politicians, but us older ones, and I'm an enviro guy, it'll be hard to live around the redneck element who made their living logging the woods and stuff. I'll have to keep my mouth shut up and more. Maybe not. I'll find the right people, but I know I'm from another country rather than the country. I know I'm going into a foreign country, but I'm welcome to be there, so long as I'm friendly to them. Natives are very friendly, but I'm a big old white guy. Could get ugly, but hopefully it won't. Hopefully I found a good home, and maybe I don't know. There's more formal academic work I've discussed with academic friends, maybe a college in the Fraser Canyon, and I still have to go back to UBC and talk to the gentleman in music advice, but maybe seeing what we can do about getting a degree post facto, because of my work in music, knowledge of it, and also my general studies in humanities and global humanities and yeah, get your degree.